Okay, let's get started. It's my pleasure to welcome Lawrence Pingree of Software Analyst Cyber Research to the webinar. Lawrence, many of you know Lawrence possibly based on your prior kind of deception or otherwise. He was at Gartner, kind of started some of the research at Gartner, and he's a real thought leader here. With Lawrence, we have Cyril Desai, who is our VP Detection Engineering. He will join us for Q&A portion, but the primary content, the star of our show today is Lawrence. Lawrence, over to you. Take it away from here.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, folks. I'm here to talk about how agentics redefines what we call preemptive deception. And the idea is we shift into this world of building a critical realism to thwart attackers. We're going to talk through the modern threat landscape of agentics, deception, as well as the progress that it's making towards agentics. So we're merging into this new world where Agentics is going to significantly and is significantly transforming the modern threat landscape. And what that means is we have this new emerging sort of bot versus bot scenario. And I know that folks at Acalvio had me on for another session where we talked about this bot versus bot future. And actually, we're kind of arriving in it now, where the new landscape is characterized by agentics and LLM-driven, cyber campaigns, where the scale and the exploit novelty will, impact us greatly. We've already seen major breaches, such as some of the, Chinese nation states with the GTG 1002 attack and report that Anthropic did. We also saw, a big breach that was, apparently driven by agentics against Mexico. And so this modern threat landscape is really increasingly autonomous and swift. Now, for years, attackers have used scripts and, staging attacks ahead of time. But, now we're on the verge of autonomous malware. And that defeats reactive defenses that tend to focus on detection and response, like things like EDR and XDR platforms. And what there really are is they're complemented by deception approaches. And let me just frame this up a little bit. Much of the data that we gather about attackers is done with deception. So when you use malware analysis sandboxes, that's a deceptive environment. When people are, detecting bad or malicious IP addresses or characterizing and categorizing various different, types of interactions in email or, trying to characterize attackers in general, their TTPs, we're doing that through deception. But detection and response approaches, especially because of the delays in getting data into these platforms, are sort of a losing battle. We're approaching this, the speed of within 5 to 15 minutes, based on the threat labs that I've talked to, from vulnerability disclosure to exploitation, with an average probably being around a day. This means that we need to start investing in things like deception platforms to enable proactive adversarial steering, this notion of harvesting the intelligence intimately and in real time, and then moving towards realism and preemption of attackers. This notion of legacy honeypots, they lack kind of the deep authenticity and living ecosystems that are needed. So when we look at the evolution that's coming with agentics, agentics moves beyond simple decoy systems and basic lures. It helps us create a realism that forms a foundation for a living ecosystem. It preemptive deception shifts to this active adversarial steering, where we can disrupt, we can harvest, and we can preempt attackers. And the evolution allows us to move towards this autonomous defense orchestration capability that I've actually talked about for many years, even when I was at Gartner. So that, in terms of emerging agentic risks, we have, these new agents that are able to basically, accelerate the phases of attack. So if you look at, typical stages like, task decomposition, they can do autonomous recon, persistent, context can be derived, and then they can move through the various phases really quickly. And what this means is, and I actually saw this on Moltbook the other day, that agents had derived even longer term memory by doing things like, heat-based memory, allowing them a longer context window and retrieve data for longer periods of time. And there's other emergent risks like misalignment, that where there's growing concern about the agents going awry, within isolated environments. And then obviously because of the memory that they can hold, they're different than an attacker because an attacker kind of has to go through a lot of steps to remember their findings, right? If I'm going through various stages, you have to collect a bunch of evidence, rely upon it and execute stages of attack. So the arrival of this new deception agent means that preemptive defense and preemptive deception that moves beyond basic deceptions where you use, traditional honeypots or, open services to a much more real deceptive environment. And the idea is we're going to move towards where we generate realist artifacts that help deceive adversaries and disrupt agentic based attacks before they succeed. And the idea is the goal shifts from just misleading attackers, but to do in real time autonomous deception allows us to do proactive steering of the threat actor or the agentic attacker. Okay, so we have a quick poll. I don't know if did you plug this in to the webinar? We
Yeah.
can run the poll real
Yes.
quick.
Yes, Lawrence. So we have the poll up for you guys. Take 30 seconds to respond. And I also want to, as you are responding, I also want to highlight that please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A tool that you have at the bottom of your screen, of the webinar screen, and we'll take the questions towards the end of the webinar. I'll give another 10 seconds. Okay. Let me end the poll and just quickly share results so that you could see.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Great, great, great answer, everyone. And so when we look at the problem that's we're facing is that traditional deception is sometimes detected by the attacker, right? And we have various layers that we kind of have to go through, which are like the real, the actual, and the empirical. And if we look at, framing up this critical realism framework, the real will comprise the unobservable foundational structures. The actual includes specific events and security actions, and the empirical represents the observable attacker maneuvers. And the idea is that we will arrive towards this future that provides more dynamic realism. So the future of AI deception systems resolve this notion of the fidelity paradox where we leverage generative AI and its creativeness and its sort of ability to be like a human to create context aware, highly interactive decoys that can fool humans and automated attackers without a huge operational risk. And if you think about it, like, deep fakes are a great example of this, right? But we can deep fake the environment the same way. So when we look at, the shifts that need to kind of occur and are occurring, there's this new movement towards this sort of proof of life agentics. So you have the real, which is kind of, the deception platform can use agentics to model the foundation of structures of a real environment, like a genuine, actual environment, and then design decoys that are fundamentally sound and indistinguishable from the real system. And we shift that from, we take the real user modeling and we shift that into agent orchestration, where the deception agents autonomously orchestrate the environment to give us a simulation of events, things like security actions, and then deceptions that are more stimulating, attractive to the threat actor. So, for example, we might simulate on the actual side a response in the SOC. Let's say that the attacker's in a deception system, and we can simulate the idea of maybe blocking them at some point, or we could simulate user traffic. So if they do something like a TCP dump on a system, then it looks like it's in a real environment. We can simulate API calls, or we can file churn the file system, and we can create activities within the environment that really just look real to the attacker. And we can use observables from the attacker maneuvers to provide live feedback to even our actual environment, where we are orchestrating responses ahead of the threat actor, but maybe based on deceptions. And so the idea is for, us to look at the MITRE attack framework and, things like initial access, discovery, credential access, privilege escalation, and then maybe, the instantiation of persistence, execution, etc., and start to look at how we can bridge, the from the old realm of static honeypots to this autonomous deception future, where the defenses move beyond those simple lures and orchestrate complex deception, what I called fluidity, throughout the attacker phases. And so if you think about it, agentic systems give us that maneuvering and steering that we kind of lacked in the old world. So if you're familiar with product, like open source projects and whatnot, those are easily, identified. And now we can, put in place, traps across the various phases of the MITRE attack framework. So we go from this static deceptive asset to this living system of deception. And what that means is, your static decoys, which are generally quickly identified. And I think Acalvio could probably tell you that, and I have some examples here of, GitHub fingerprinting tools for honeypots. You can easily just scan a honeypot, and based on either the network profile or banners that are grabbed from various services, or even sniffed by the system, you can actually detect that it's a honeypot in a system that's a living deception. Then that is not possible, and we can trick the attacker. And keep in mind, obviously, enterprises require this sort of passive mode, that's auditable and provides defensible security controls. And that the idea is to neutralize threats without an escalation. So when we're, creating and moving to agentic systems, we can think about ways to create that living system environment in which, when we start to get the first nudge that an attacker is, doing some execution of a phase, we can then redirect the adversary into the deception environment. So, for example, like an Nmap scan might, tell us, hey, we need to move that attacker to some other system, and, maybe monitor and redirect that traffic, or maybe even, that environment into our deception environment. And then in the case of lateral movement, you have, this idea that where agents can continually spin up fake assets to steer the attacker in, so think of it this way. If we're monitoring, for example, the live environment, we can then, let's say an attacker does an Nmap scan and they're going through various hosts on the network. We can start to rise up systems in their path and then nab them in the act, right? Redirect them to those, various, I would say attractive breadcrumbs, decoys, and other kinds of goodies to get them attracted. Okay, so we can also do things like realistic breadcrumbs, credentials that we inject in the environment, and even that can allow them to gain privilege in a system that's a decoy, right? And then during the whole entire process, we're extracting really rich observables and the TTPs and even maybe architecting signatures and detection logic around 0 days. So the idea that this living ecosystem that we arrive in allows us to really get rich data on attackers. So the other thing that comes with, the agentic revolution is agents can then automatically deploy that deceptive infrastructure instantly on demand in the environment without a human really guiding it. We can also, like I said, we can, create those triggers, maybe various things we monitor in the environment that will, automatically trigger the agentics to spin up those fake assets. We can dynamically scale them based on any behavior that the attacker is exuding. And this immediate response makes the deception really, pervasive for, not only redirecting the attacker, spending their time, but also giving us rich data to be able to go after. So on the right, we kind of have this graphic of various components that can be used to set up this hall of mirrors sort of environment with things like decoys or fake rooms, treasure vaults, breadcrumbs and baits, throughout the environment. And we can have those things kind of move around. Um, so one of the cool, takeaways from using deception, and it's used by, entities like the FBI and police departments pretty regularly, right, to help catch attackers, and bad actors, is that, it gives you this notion of one trackable session. And if you think about it, I think the concept of honeypots came from many years ago when farmers had problems with, bears, right? And sweets are attractive to bears, and so bears go to the honeypot that they set out, and then they could shoot them with their shotgun or whatever. So the idea is that, this notion of improving it with agentics will also help us reduce the alert noise for the SOC. It gives us the ability not only to detect, in the environment from various detective controls, but a honey or a decoy or a simulated environment is super high fidelity, right? If somebody's in that environment, they're there for a reason. They're not doing normal activities in the environment. And so analysts can concentrate their real responses on active adversarial steering in the environment, and they can do that in unison with agentics, right? The focus will shift to, reacting to low or, away from this high, I would say, just enormous alert overload that we get, even if we're doing incidents in the SOC, to focus on more high fidelity activities. And deception helps consolidate that activity into a very high fidelity signal and session in the SOC. So agentics can, as I pointed out, can create this notion of a phantom network. So imagine a network that kind of reorganizes on its own, right? Imagine that I actually used a screen cap here of an Nmap scan, which is a typical step in a lot of the reconnaissance phases of maybe someone that has breached a machine and they're looking for trust relationships. I mean, there's lots of other activity that might happen, but this is just a basic example. But if you notice here, it's kind of articulating there's an HTTP proxy there. Well, that gives the attacker, the additional phases of intelligence that they need, to execute the steps moving forward. And imagine if the network was constantly shifting and changing. So each time the attacker scans, they're like, Well, I can't tell where I'm at. It's kind of like confusing somebody, with various signs on a road and redirecting them different ways. And agentic systems can orchestrate that kind of environment and rearrange it on a constant basis. Maybe, either when an attacker is doing their thing or maybe on a regular interval, maybe for performance reasons. But the idea is that you can create this phantom network that allows SecOps to, use agentics to drift that attacker away from your sensitive assets. So the art of the redirect, right? Agents rapidly detect the initial sign of attacker presence, right? And they can monitor things in real time. They can constantly be looking and triaging. And then when they detect that, nudge against any kind of detection, they can then instrument the environment and immediately steer that attacker. Something that today is really hard to do with the SOC, given delays in the telemetry, the triage. Even when you're accelerating that with agentics, you kind of need more real-time systems looking there. And so the idea is that we move to this new active adversarial steering, and prefer that in our environments. So the idea of the deception, goal here is to shift to this more operational and realism environment. And so on the graphic on the left here, I've articulated basically the phases that you might go through to do this in your environment. And so in phase one, you have agents that will continuously monitor that real environment. They'll be maybe, then simulating in the environment the kernel level activities. They might even do registry changes, right? They might mimic the user doing different clicks in the UI or within the browser. They might even create leakable documents that can be strategically placed. They might even edit files and create documentation that looks really enticing, right? So the idea is that you create this illusion phase where the artifacts of deception become basically indistinguishable from a user. And this creates that realism that we need for adversaries to really believe that they're in a live system and move through the various stages of attack, and gives us deeper and deeper visibility into the things that they do. And of course, at the end is set that trap to move them, towards real deceptions, or, this new real type deceptive environments. And while we're constantly extracting information to protect our assets in the environment. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, some attacker gets into a system. You then can characterize easily their C2, right? And it's a little different than a sandbox, because a sandbox tends to work on, performance based basis, and they do a lot of emulations and other things. And, a live attacker is going to be quite different. An agentic attacker in the environment is going to also be quite different. And what we can do is, in that real time, we could be adjusting things in the SOC, and protecting the real assets. So if we had detected that C2, now we can put that on our hot list in the SOC and put it on all our block lists, for making sure that we cut the cord to the remote attacker. So, we can also do things with agentics that are pretty trick. And I used a snap of the example here, which is kind of like a banner grab from, a proxy that I have deployed in my isolated environment. But, one of the key things here is that attackers, if you think about it, when you're doing remote viewing into some RDP and you're kind of navigating the webs, or the session, or maybe you're on a command line, have you ever thought that you are reliant on everything that the system is telling you, right? Like, so the idea that, the command line would lie to you, well, you would have probably not have thought that, right? So the idea there is to use the psychology and the bias that the attacker or even the agentics has against it, right? And so, for example, I picked out Scattered Spider because I did a report on Scattered Spider. And if you think about the things that they did once they were in the environment, they started searching, Teams and Slack for various keywords. Well, if we pick up on that, and our agent is reading the activities in the environment, well, then, that we can actually place those kinds of things in their path, right? And attackers are driven by the perceived high value targets, and they use scripting to try to go for those targets very fast. I think in some of the Scattered Spider and subsequent other threat groups, they went through, and used scripting to really accelerate those attacks. And so we can use that, cognitive or programmatic bias to make the deception highly believable, but also to thwart the various stages of attack and exploit the need for that sort of irresistible critical information that they're after. And then, of course, because we have that information and we know, hey, they did a search and we gave them these results, then we can instantly redirect them to a system that we have created within our agentics as fake. So think about it as agentics allows us to create a compelling reality that the attacker will want to accept. So, so making we can also go to this strategic level where this is kind of illustrating the entire environment that we might build with a distributed deception platform, where you have the Gen AI orchestrating and doing the generation across the environment. So in the case of a cloud environment, it might be creating digital twins of our environment. In an OT environment, it might create control system consoles and fake, portals to go to. In an IT office, it might create a fake RDP system that we can then watch very deeply. In IoT, a great example just recently. I mean, I think Intune and there was an attack just reported on that left a lot of devices being wiped. We could have potentially misled that attacker into a different console or something that looked like Intune, right? And so the idea here is that we can also, once we move that attacker into an environment, we can also do various things in a sandbox. So when we encounter a sophisticated actor or even an agent or an agentic driven attacker, we can help contain the threat by isolating them into sandboxes, right? And sandbox is kind of another word for decoy. We can, control that environment entirely. It helps maintain the illusion. So we redirect them in that environment. And then because we have deep monitoring of that environment, it gives us, the ability to extract 0 days, monitor network traffic, have all the keys to be able to inspect SSL sessions, giving us content level access to various interactions. And then, of course, we can extract all the activities with things like eBBF sensors and things like Kubernetes and Linux, etc. And that maxes our intelligence ROI from our environment because we know that it's high fidelity. So one of the cool things in the ROI here is that the high fidelity nature of detections that are actually gathered. You all probably know, especially if you sit in a SOC. I mean, I have a SOC here. I get over 1,000 alerts an hour, right? And that's only for a very small handful of systems, not as big as an enterprise. But I have sat in the big console with 1,000 alerts or 1,000 incidents being called an hour, which is really overwhelming, right? But if you have really, really rich data in an environment that is heavily monitored, you can extract this great data that you can instantly enforce in the environment. And I cannot stress this more. It is so valuable to use deception against attackers. And we just use it every day. So you need to prioritize an investment in here. All right, jump to a quick poll here.
Yeah, I am gonna launch it. Here you go. Let's take another 30 seconds. And again, remind you to submit your questions at the bottom of the screen in the Q&A tab. Wait for another 15 seconds for taking any more response. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, and not surprised that people replied with highly concerned. The first answer, moderately
Excellent.
okay.
Yeah, I
Mike.
mean I mean obviously being concerned about these sort of automated threats. I mean, now the attacker really has, I mean they had an edge, but now they really have like a kind of a razor edge on us, right? Because now I'm hearing that between 5 and 15 minutes to exploitation. I mean, how do you defend an environment when your patch cycle is, I don't know, 15, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, right? Or mitigation has to go through, very, lengthy processes. I mean, that's just not something that we can operate under, and especially under wartime conditions, right? So we can also do things like leverage, LLM predictability against the agentics that are being used. So, for example, obviously, we know that prompt injection's a thing, right? We also know that fake secrets can be placed in the environment, but they can also exploit tokenization and kind of use things like Unicode edge case, decodes or encoding to induce predictable hallucinations, right? They can do things like context window exhaustion. They can flood attackers with fake logs or CVEs to kind of, trip up all of the logic within an LLM based attack. You can redirect by doing things that we know of that's being used in things like phishing and exfiltration, right? I think all of you heard about Microsoft's Copilot exfiltration problem. And you've probably heard about that, embedded text. It's kind of hidden. It's all looks like your background. It's like white. That can instruct an LLM that might be reading your email to exfil data, right? These kinds of things can also be used against the agent to disrupt the agent. And so, an example here is the cheat framework, which is cloak, honey, and trap framework. And this kind of just talks through, gives you the flow of various different ways that we can introduce that kind of concept throughout our environment. Now, of course, one of the critical phases, which is counterattack and leverage of reverse shell, I wanted to call out that obviously they have to be authorized or government to do those kinds of activities and check with your legal department. But the cheat free framework can help with disrupting a malicious LLM and just formulating the thinking around your deception environment. Um, and then this is an example of the agentic attack that Anthropic went and reported on. And the graphic on the left here is to try to illustrate the kinds of things we might do in the various phases of the cheat framework, such as generating dynamic IPs or monitoring tempo and then injecting various things into the phases of the attack, maybe generating fake certificates or credentials in those various phases. And this next slide kind of talks through, bringing all of that information into the way that you program and you deploy your generative preemptive deception deployment. So think of it this way: you have various stages of deployment. You might do an assessment of your environment, some planning ahead of time, looking at the threat, landscape, and maybe the types of things you would want in your environment for, deceptions. Then you would, develop the techniques that you want to apply, and then, maybe source the hardware, the software to do so. But then in the later phases, when you get to testing, monitoring and management, and staff training and awareness, The two phases of number 5 and 8 can be kind of a continuous cycle that's automated by agentics. So creating this feedback loop where autonomous runtime refinements can be done is going to be really key to preventing the future of threats. So just an example to bring it home with the GTG 1002, which is the Anthropic attack. So the question people might have is, can it defeat that kind of attack? And the answer is yes, it can. And this gives them, gives us, even in, let's say, an agentic, isolated container environment, the ability to intercede, even if we're doing some hosting of various agentics. And so, various stages we can do different activities, as I kind of called out. But yes, you can start to help defeat attackers even within your sort of self-hosted agentics, or even Anthropic could use this, right? So just to kind of frame things up on the market side, obviously I want to just touch on again, the goal is to move past defense in depth and detection and response to this idea of deception in depth, where the network environment and all the artifacts change faster than the attacker can map it, right? And on the left is a graphic of various market participants. Of course, Acalvio is included. There are phases that these different players are in. You have the emerging AI-driven deceptions. You have sort of the traditional deception players that are more pure play. They might focus on, various decoys, or they might have a domain-specific offering that focuses on maybe email, or their SASE infrastructure, kind of looking at embedding some deceptions in the SASE architecture. Or they might be focused on generating intelligence, or in an XDR consolidator. But when we look to the future here, early 2026 marks that sort of deception as a service into the US market, and it's being fueled by multiple funding rounds, and specifically to start countering these autonomous agentic AI threats. So the future looks like an autonomous cyber immune system where the SOC will get continuous feedback from various deceptions, and we will continually refine things like our SOAR responses in the environment based on it. And the idea is that we arrive at this place where there's kind of like this industrialized fake door and deep fake apps. So think about how you might use your deception system to create a deep fake app, right? You all have probably heard about the ability to, or you might be doing this, generating applications in real time, right? Well, the beauty of that is you can create generative deepfake apps, right? And so in real time, you can say, well, here's an Intune portal, or here's a O365 or OA interface, or yeah, I mean just various many different ways that you can create. You could create fake VPN applications or portals. So I think that this notion of shifting the attacker from detection to active deception and deep fake applications is going to be a superpower for us. So watch out for the future state. Agents and agentics replace traditional automations, and defender-led triggering to continuous engagement. We build this living ecosystem, deception ecosystem, to defeat autonomous threats. The fight evolves from simple defense to adversarial steering. And then the idea, maybe a generation from now, might be self-shielding architectures that are the future of a resilient security. That is the conclusion of my webinar. I will turn it back over to our main host. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Lawrence. Really, really interesting information, as well as the insights. And yeah, let's take questions. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
let's see
Yeah.
here.
All right. So the first
Is this,
question,
yeah, oh, go ahead.
I'll read this.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Is this just VM and containers? What type of VMs and containers are supported? Maybe do you go for specific types because they are exploited more in the wild, or it's based on what is most used by users who are trying to protect?
I mean, I can also let Surreal weigh in here, but I would say that in general, container environments are the easiest to instrument and kind of actively change, right? Containers launch really quickly, and they look like the typical live environment in the cloud. Um, I think that's probably the direction most of the market is headed. But I would also say that VMs are, equally, tantalizing. And there are basically various, benefits and drawbacks to VM based, right? So VM gives you a little bit more, I would say solid footing in terms of things like, kernel access and such. So, I mean, they might be able to get some additional telemetry there. But, from my perspective, in terms of kind of orchestrating the environment, Kubernetes is certainly a useful, and even the cloud itself, obviously, is a very useful tool. I don't know if any of you guys want to jump in there.
Cyril, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think, completely agreed with Lawrence. From a platform point of view, what we have done is this. Basically, the idea is that we have a rich set of pre-built catalog, which is based, and the considerations for pre-built are around two fronts. One is what are the popularly used types of assets in the environment. So, for example, if you look at a containerized workload, then let's say a EKS or a ECS cluster, or if you look at, on an Azure Kubernetes stack as well. So we look at what are the popularly used stacks. And if you look at VMs, could be Hyper-V, KVM, ESX. So we look at the popularly used and package those up as a pre-packaged catalog. But ultimately, a large distributed organization always has a bespoke set of things which may not be available in the out-of-box catalog. So it's important for the platform to then also design for extensibility,
Hmm.
because no matter what number of prepackaged things you offer, there is always the case that two things could be the case, that a given organization is using assets that are slightly different, or the second is a threat might emerge that might target a particular type of bespoke equipment. So what we do in our platform is combine these two. We provide a packaged set of offerings and then design in for extensibility so that it can be extended without requiring new versions of the product.
That's great.
Sounds good. Let me take the next question.
Yeah.
Uh, what is the primary goal shift of preemptive deception platforms? Lawrence?
Ooh, I mean, I think the primary goal, look, I have firewalls of my own. I get attacked on a constant basis, like literally while we're doing this webinar, right? And there's just so much noise generated. It's just enormous. And, sure, I've got block list handling and I've got other responsive active controls. But, whenever something touches a deception, then I know it's not just, you know, I mean, especially in later stages, it's not just a script kiddie, right? It's somebody after some gold. And really that helps me characterize, I mean, the shift is really to get better fidelity. And the idea has always been to sort of put the expensive or the cost rather than on us. We want to place it on the attacker. We want to make it difficult for them. And, if somebody or even an agent is spending all its time trying to triage an environment that always changes and it looks real, then we've kind of done our job. We've stopped them in their tracks and we've delayed them to execute other things, right? So to me, I think it's shifting the burden, but also doing it with this, sort of autonomous architecture of the future, which will really be beneficial. And that's the preemptive nature of this.
Thanks, Lawrence. I'll take the next question. Is there a cloud account equivalent of this where the agent is changing resource properties based on attacker interactions?
Surreal, maybe. I don't know if you want to take that one.
Sure. So I guess if the so definitely there are lots of exploits being discussed where agents in cloud environments are actually doing a multi-stage exploit. So for example, there was a recent research report published about a month back where a threat actor coerced effectively a agent to go and get administrative permissions in the cloud and then perform LLM jacking to actually do unauthorized GPU processing and and get access to AWS Bedrock in that case. So now, if this type of exploit sequence is basically being automated by agents and not just agents, sub-agents, where they're doing all the activity in parallel. And so now, if you want to combat that as a defender, then there are two parts to it. One is you should try to, as a result, detect as early as possible. But the second is also, if possible, divert the agent down a rabbit hole away from its core mission. So let's say there is a set of attack pathways that the agent is trying to pursue. We can, as a defender, create deceptive pathways and set traps in the cloud. For example, service accounts in IAM stores, correspondingly access keys and secrets sprinkled over cloud workloads. Now, when the agent is trying to propagate, it is looking for those opportunities. It finds fake opportunities. It does not know that they're fake. It tries to start chasing them. So it's going away from its mission, buying time for the defender to do something about it.
That's right. And I think that's a really great point you make because if we can delay them enough to be able to get other telemetry in our environment, that often takes, 15 minutes, an hour, I mean, to get, that enhances our triage and response capability while we're, moving to this more agentic future where we can go more real time and runtime. So I agree. I think, I think deception will always have a place in my heart because I know how much it affects everything. I mean, we just use it every day. We just don't know it. And so I think it's really an industry imperative to move to utilizing these kinds of tools.
Thanks, Lawrence. Cyril. Next question. Is this phantom network touching the actual network anywhere, or is just a completely separate environment? How does someone first enter this deceptive environment? Is that, I think you referred to phantom network somewhere, I guess.
Oh yeah. So I mean, you can do a number of things. I mean, you can of course change the real environment if you want to. In things like orchestrators like Kubernetes. I mean, we can change port numbers at whim, right? We can move around, various application layers without really affecting users. So the answer is yes, you can do that. I think most enterprises might be a little bit concerned about that. So there's other options like sending them into, a deceptive, phantom network that might be hosted in the cloud and away from those assets. But I think you could do a combination of both, right? The idea of being able to do deception across both, methods, especially with agentics, I think is a really interesting possibility for the future. So, where you don't do it in a disruptive manner, right? Now, eventually we will get there with LLMs. I mean, they're still going a little bit off the rails occasionally, but so they might be better in the deceptive environment. But I think the hope is that we'll get there. So.
Very good. Thanks. Let me take the next question. What are the break glass controls that you had to invoke in extreme cases? Have you seen attackers who have probably taken over admin in your deceptive environment? Uh, what is the procedure then?
Oh, well, you're talking about, I think they're talking about protecting the actual deception environment and the admin accounts there rather than decoys and honey tokens. Obviously, I mean, any system, I mean, it doesn't really represent much of a risk other than maybe compute. So if it did happen, but I think most providers have typical controls like, multi-factor authentication, and yeah, you want to make sure that you're isolating that environment, at least from an access point of view, like you would any kind of sensitive, critical infrastructure. So, I mean, generally jump hosts, VPNs, SASE, very private networks, and even things like, PAM solutions would be, something to use there.
Cyril, do you have any comment there?
No, I completely agreed. And I would say that when as a defender, one has to assume that the attacker will get into the deceptive environment. That's what we want. And we also then have to further assume that they will escalate permissions to admin, because that's again the objective that we are setting for ourselves. So now a deception platform, in the design of the platform, we need to consider this as a going in consideration that this is going to occur.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that now, what can you do to ensure that it doesn't break the production network, which is, of course, the one that we're trying to safeguard? So there are multiple controls, defense in depth has to be applied. Many of the controls that Lawrence spoke about are the ones to be applied. And in addition to that, one other aspect is the underneath substrate that's providing the deception platform. So, for example, let's say the deception platform is being managed by underneath infrastructure. The attacker does not have access to that underneath infrastructure, right? Because that's it, they are running in a monitored environment. So if you can do something in the layer below where the attacker has access, and then do containment where you say you can control, and in today's world using software defined networking, using generative AI, there is a lot of these type of controls that can be dynamically set up, which the attacker does not have access to. So even if they are admin, they're admin in their environment. But underneath that, there is a different world where we can control what the attacker does as a containment mechanism.
Yeah, and one way I would put it is, for detection engineering, honeypots and deception environments are just rich. So I'll give you an example. I deployed some here in my environment, and within minutes, I was seeing things that the detail that I never really saw before, right? Because most of us have all these controls kind of blocking and, not giving us really rich telemetry. And I saw things like various passwords that they were trying to use, various C2 and distribution sites. Like a lot of times, malware, even autonomous malware, they're doing their multi-stage attacks in scripts, right? So in the script, it's saying, "Oh, do a wget or do a PowerShell, and call out to this particular IP." And if you're just blocking it ahead of time, you won't get those new IPs as they're emerging. So this helps you enrich detection engineering with really, really good data.
Very nice. Let's take some more questions there. When I hear cyber deception or honeypots, I still think of high maintenance static virtual machines that can take weeks to configure.
No.
Uh, I sense that it's not the world, but that's my perception been.
I'll answer that one because I know that these systems are rich and powerful. And so, of course, they do require a little bit of setup, but they're far, far easier to set up these days and instrument in the environment than before. And some of I mean, I don't want to speak for Acalvio here, but I think it's, you can get value within only minutes, right? So, the idea that you have to do, lots of maintenance, that's gone. If you do an open source, of course, then you're going to require that. And then, of course, open source is very easily fingerprinted, right?
Cyril, any comment?
Yeah, I think the concepts of deception, whether, for example, if you look at open source honeypots about 10, 15 years ago, Honeyd, Dionia, Kippo, various of those were available, and those were required care and feed because they're emulating a certain protocol. The protocol might evolve, and so the deception has to be kept current. With many different things available to deception platforms now, one of them is cloud, the second is SDN, and the third is AI infrastructure, right? So if as a well-designed deception platform like Acalvio combines these fabrics, and now you can use that to actually build dynamic deceptions as a way to make it easy for the administrator to roll out without
Yeah.
having to do something manual about it, right? So that's basically what sets apart commercial high quality platforms from the ones
Yeah.
that were there earlier.
I think of it as like, we're in the cloud era, right? I mean, so it's all orchestratable, it's all, easily administered through consoles that automate and orchestrate all this stuff. So the answer is, resoundingly, it's easy.
All right. We have many questions. So let's see. Who is training these deception agents? Are you bringing in threat intel to inform? How will they know what is unique to my environment?
Yeah, I think Surreal might want to jump into
Yes.
how
I
Acalvio
mean, I
would
think
work.
that's this is a very good point. So in order for deception to be effective, there needs to be a strategy. So one has to figure out as a defender what set of deceptions need to be placed, what should they represent, and most importantly, where should you place it? Placement is one of the most important criteria. Now, to inform such a strategy, many different dimensions need to be provided as an input. One of them is the type of assets in the environment. So what's actually the production network looking like? Is it a data center? It has Linux servers, it has Windows, what's running in the neighborhood? So the deception should look relevant to what is there in the environment. So one is the nature of the assets. The second, which was referenced in the question, is about the nature of threats. So what type of threats have either been observed or also have been provided through threat intel feeds. So a good quality deception platform will ingest that as an input, as a precursor to the deception strategy, and then use AI to be able to automate these strategy steps so that you get eventually as an output effective placement and an effective strategy that will work against the attack paths that the attacker is trying to go after or the agent is exploiting.
Yeah. Isn't it so it's right that Acalvio has this ability to retrieve from the environment and then just augment
Yes.
the
So
actual deceptions?
So what we do in our platform is we do effectively a discovery step where we get an understanding of the production environment, asset characteristics, and that discovery is not just one time, it's done periodically and updated dynamically because the environment is always changing. And so discovery gives us asset view. We also ingest threat views, whether it be from threats observed by other controls. For example, did the EDR observe a low fidelity alert? And so we ingest that as well. And then the third thing is we ingest threat intel feeds, fuse all this data to get an understanding of A, the assets and the exploitable attack pathways, then use AI to get the deception strategy based built out.
If I were deploying this, I would use things like my own threat intelligence to even do things that are trick like NAT, right?
Hmm.
Where I NAT the threat actor from based on the intel right into the deceptions, right? If I know it's a threat actor, I'm just gonna do it and extract all the intelligence. I don't know if that's the best practice, but for me, that's what I would do.
We are almost at the time, but let me just take a last question and we could kind of
Sure.
do short answers. What is the cost to value ratio that you see here? Deploying deceptive environment can become costly, but if we do not get enough valuable insights, it's not worth it. What your experience has been?
I'll let you guys jump in on that one.
Yeah. So what I would say is this. So there are two forms of deception. There's honey tokens and there is decoys. So from a cost, whether it be from a resource or even in terms of license, sometimes honey tokens is a good entry point. It gets a way to get value quickly without adding a lot of overheads. And as the maturity of the deception programming increases, decoys can be added. So that's basically one way to offset the strategy.
Sounds good. Thank you. We still have some outstanding questions. We'll make sure that we get answers to you. Again, we are at the top of the hour and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you again for attending the webinar. We'll send you the recording of the webinar that you could review again at your convenience. We will be at RSA, so yeah, we'll be happy to meet with you, show you the demos, walk you through some of these with real examples. That will be great. We'll send you an email when we send thank you note with a link to schedule time with us. Thanks so much, Lawrence, for doing this
Hey,
and sharing your insights of 1,000 years on deception and this your all research around AI and agentics and all of that.
Hey, it's my pleasure. I have a great time. I mean, obviously thinking about all these things throughout my lifetime. It makes me a little kooky, but thank you very much for having me, guys.
All right. Thanks, Lawrence. Thanks,
Take
Cyril.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.